I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the Israeli Prime Minister meets with several top leaders at the World Economic Forum. The United States warns Israel against deporting African asylum seekers. And we'll reveal the top 5 reasons Israelis just can't handle the winter. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has just arrived in Switzerland to attend the 4-day World Economic Forum. This is one of the biggest gathering of foreign politicians, business heads, bankers, and even celebrities of the year, which aims to advance international cooperation between nations. It's also one of the biggest opportunities for foreign leaders to come face to face. Netanyahu has actually just met with both French President Emmanuel Macron and Spain's King Philippe VI. But bigger than the issue of money was the growing concern over the latest hiccup in Israeli-Palestinian peace talks.
Look, I've always been very clear on that. I think what we have to do is to work fairly on the peace process in the short term. And I think I will not take any decision in reaction of those decisions. I want to accompany and facilitate the peace process. And our philosophy is very clear for the very beginning: recognition of 2 states, with Jerusalem will be the capital on 2 sides, and common frontiers recognized following it.
In response to President Trump's controversial decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, several European nations are considering officially recognizing the Palestinian state. Slovenia says they plan to do so in just a few weeks. Macron, however, says France will not recognize Palestine, at least not as a reaction to Trump's recognition. Netanyahu is actually scheduled to meet one-on-one with Trump later today at the forum. The two plan to discuss proposed changes to the Iran nuclear deal or even possible options for nixing it altogether. Some of the top NGOs and aid groups in the world have come together, urging the United States to reverse its budget cuts to the Palestinians. The Trump administration has already dropped over half of its funding to the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, but apparently the White House is considering slashing even more and potentially even everything. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with the update on this. So, Aaron, the international community claims that those payments are what keeps the Palestinians living in any semblance of dignity. So what are the arguments as to, why they would cut this funding?
Primarily, the reasons center around alleged abuses by the Palestinian leadership. Aside from the fact that hundreds of millions of dollars goes missing to terrorists and their families, and the alleged abuses and support for terrorism that UNRWA has provided. But, so take this, for example. If there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the West Bank, why was President Abbas worth $100 million as far back as 3 years ago? In fact, the former security minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Dakhlan, said that he had taken $1.3 billion in his first decade as president. So, and he's far from the only abuser.
Well, those are some serious issues that need to be addressed clearly. Let's hear a report and get some more details.
Executives from Save the Children, Care USA, Refugees International, and over a dozen other aid groups say that the budget cuts dramatically endanger lives, disrupting food, healthcare, and education to Palestinian refugees all over the world. The letter accuses the United States of cutting this aid not based on humanitarian concern, but because it's seemingly meant to collectively punish the Palestinians for refusing to negotiate with the United States leaders in the peace process. Palestinian leaders, however, argue that they only withdrew from the negotiating table because of President Trump's controversial Jerusalem decision. They argue that it makes no sense why Palestinians should be punished for a choice President Trump himself made. An unconfirmed Israeli report, however, says that the Palestinian leaders have just purchased a $50 million private jet for PA President Mahmoud Abbas. That's a staggering price tag considering the concern over these budget cuts. And if true, this report would indicate a very troubling attitude in Palestinian leadership during a time when they claim that their own people are starving. But many still argue that the UN's Refugee Agency for Palestinians is one of the only life rafts for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians all over the world.
A new public opinion poll has just come out in Israel revealing that support for a two-state solution is lower than ever among both Palestinians and Israelis alike. 53% of Israelis say they back two states, and just 47% of Palestinians say the same. Well, joining us now to discuss whether this option is still feasible in the current environment is Uri Zaki, the president of the Meretz Governing Assembly, and Ali Foul, the assistant director of Standing Together. Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so why is overall support for the two-state solution decreasing?
I'm actually not surprised. You know, the poll itself said that the reason that folks who were polled gave is that the settlement expansion makes the two states solution unrealistic. Now, it is true. It's not about them not supporting the two-state solution as an ideal solution for the conflict, but rather saying it's not feasible because of the Netanyahu government expansion of settlements. Now, it's true. And if we will lose the opportunity to have a two-state solution, that means a doom for the Zionist vision. That means an end to the notion of a democratic Jewish homeland. And it's really bad news.
All right, Ali?
So, I think that, I'm not sure what the dream of Zionism has to do with building an Arab state in Israel, but again, maybe I may be wrong with the definition. I think the two-state solution has never been a solution. We were making a facade. In terms of the Jewish side, there's a much bigger drop just simply because the Arab public, certainly in Gaza, who 80% voted for a radical Islamic terrorist organization, and Abu Mazen himself, who never accepted the idea of a Jewish state at all in the land of Israel, I think it was a facade, and maybe the mass is being taken off now, and thank God on our side, people are saying, you know what, enough with this facade. We don't believe it. They say it's because of the settlements. I mean, again, years in the past when there were no settlements, there was no peace. It's time to take truth over diplomacy. It really is. Enough of the diplomacy that doesn't work.
But is there a solution that exists beyond two states?
Well, I think that
is a question here,
well,
right?
I think that, like I always say, in order to find the solution, you have to define the problem. And as long as someone's defining the problem as a land problem, there won't be a solution because you're finding a solution to the wrong problem. In other words, the Arabs' desire to destroy Israel existed when there were no settlements, existed 48 to 67. They were murdering Jews before the state of Israel. It's a culture problem. And as long as we're not dealing with that culture problem, it's still going to go on. We can make nice things and call it peace, but it's not happening. We gave them Gaza, and we saw thousands of missiles.
Now, Uli, what is your response to that?
Time is working against us. Again, we have a reality now that in maybe less than 2 years, there'll be a majority of Palestinians living under Israeli control. Now, when this time comes, and it's around the corner, that means we'll have to choose whether we'll choose keeping our Jewish identity and thus becoming an apartheid state de facto, or giving one person, one vote, the famous democratic principle, but that means the end of Israel as a Jewish nation. This choice of two elements that are together are the basic elements of Zionism, that's a doom for Israel. And it's horrible. And I don't see any other good solution except from the two-state solution. Of course, there are some possibilities within the two-state framework that can work to make it better.
Let's get your last thoughts in because we're going to have to wrap this up.
Again, Netanyahu was the only prime minister who made a settlement freeze. Nothing happened in that time. Again, the idea of apartheid, this is terrible. It's what the worst of Israel's enemies say. There's no apartheid. We have 20% of non-Jewish equal citizens in this country. It's terrible to use that language. The reason the two-state solution has failed is because the Arabs have a culture since the beginning of Israel to destroy Israel. It existed when there were no settlements. It existed when there were no Israel. It's time to stop playing diplomacy when truth is on the line.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for not screaming at each other today. All right, guys. All right, in Hebron, Palestinians and Israelis are coming together in the name of saving lives. And last week, we had the chance to check out their work firsthand. Take a look. When you hear about the city of Hebron in the news, it's usually because of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. But this scene that you're seeing right here is actually something that happens on a daily basis. Palestinian and Israeli medics working side by side.
We are medic.
Yeah.
We are medic.
Our mission is to save like one.
Yeah, here we have to forget Israeli and Palestinian.
If it's you are Palestinian, American, whatever.
Yes.
If you need help, I come to help you. That's it.
I will not ask injury, who is you? Who are you?
Today, medics and doctors from the Israeli Magen David Adom Service, the Palestinian Red Crescent, and the NGO Rescue Without Borders are joining in Hebron to learn how to work together during emergency situations.
השפה המדוברת היא שונה. פלסטינים מדברים בערבית, על פי רוב לא בעברית. אנחנו מדברים עברית, אבל אנחנו רוצים שלפחות השפה של העבודה בשטח תהיה אותה שפה, ובשביל זה צריכים לעשות כל הזמן הדרכות וסימולציות כדי שכולם ידעו לעבוד באותה צורה כשיש אירוע אמיתי.
Israeli medics aren't allowed to enter certain areas of the West Bank, but by providing Palestinian medics with even better first aid training, they're still able to work together from afar. And both sides learn a lot along the way.
كمان إشي إنه لما إجينا اشتغلنا معهم هيك ما حسينا بخوف إنه يعني في خوف أو إشي بناتنا عادي زينا زيهم اشتغلنا وهيك ما حسينا بأي خوف وكنا.
Whether it's a fire in an Arab school in Hebron or a car accident with Israeli victims, everyday Palestinian and Israeli medics are working together to save lives, even when they aren't on duty.
There was a time I saw one of the ambulances, the Palestinian ambulance on the side, and I stopped my car. I said, "Do you need any help?" He said, "Yes," and we delivered a baby on the side of the road.
This is Dr. Ali Shrouk. He's from the Palestinian town of Daryai. He happened to be the first doctor on the scene of a tragic terror attack that left Rabbi Michael Mark, a father of 10, dead in the South Hebron Hills. When a Palestinian gunman opened fire on their car in July of last year, Rabbi Mark's wife and children were also critically wounded. But luckily, Dr. Shrouk happened to be driving by the scene of the attack just after it occurred and immediately went to help them. This is just one example of a coexistence often unheard of in the region.
Maybe our working together give the people in the top to think about peace, about that we have to live together, we have to work together, we have to help together. Our children and their children have to get a life, a good life.
Would you invite him to coffee?
Why not? Not just for coffee.
Hummus also.
Hummus and knafi and maglubi, why not?
The government's controversial plan to either deport or jail nearly 40,000 asylum seekers from Africa beginning in April is quickly escalating into a global debate. Though Rwanda denies a secret deal to accept African migrants from Israel for money, Prime Minister Netanyahu has just met with the president of Rwanda and told him Israel will only deport Africans there as long as it complies with international law. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with us. Now, Brett, how does this promise impact the government's plan?
Honestly, Natasha, I'm not really sure that it does. I think unless something really big changes, Netanyahu has every intention of starting these deportations come April. Because the key term he uses here is international law, and that means that a nation can't forcibly deport someone to a third-party country, especially not if they're a refugee. But remember, this is an administration that denies the refugees at all, even though most countries do happen to grant them refugee status. And as for the issue of forced deportations, Israel argues that asylum seekers do have a choice. They can either choose to be deported or choose to go to prison forever, which, let's be honest here, if you're one of these 40,000 asylum seekers who's lived here or even raised a family here for almost 10 years now, what kind of choice is that?
This issue, of course, is probably one of the most heated, sometimes most personal debates here in Israel. A lot of Israelis say this population doesn't contribute to society and causes problems, but then others, including Holocaust survivors, rabbis, etc., say the Jewish state was founded by refugees not so long ago, so why can't we take in this small amount?
Yeah, and that's actually the exact legal argument that's about to take place on this, too. A top human rights lawyer is petitioning the High Court to halt the deportations once and for all, and Israel's Declaration of Independence, specifically the clause that promises, quote, freedom, justice, righteousness, and peace based on the Jewish tradition, is cited as one of the central arguments. Needless to say, everyone is extremely anxious to see what's going to happen, as you'll see now in my report.
Though Netanyahu has branded them as illegal infiltrators, nearly 40,000 African men, women, and children say they fled genocide, war, and indefinite service in a slave army for a better life in Israel. Indeed, many developed nations do accept this population, mostly from Eritrea and Sudan, as legal refugees, including the UN's top refugee agency. But the Israeli government maintains that they do not qualify as such, despite testimonies of torture, human trafficking, and abuse. The state has granted official refugee status to less than 1% of those currently in Israel. Organizations all over the world, including top Jewish leaders, rabbis, doctors, and the ADL, as well as Holocaust survivors, have begged the state to halt its plan to start the deportations in 2 months.
Israel's ambassador to the U.S. is apparently even more Netanyahu personally, saying the blowback from these deportations could be a PR nightmare for the Jewish state. Netanyahu promises guaranteed safety to Africans deported to a third-party country, widely believed to be Rwanda, but rights groups point out that Israel has already deported several thousand Africans to Rwanda in recent years, and stories of extortion, human trafficking, disappearances, and worse have often followed. This is why Holocaust survivors here in Israel are promising to hide African asylum seekers in their home instead of, quote, sending them to their deaths. According to them, this merely echoes the acts that saved their lives during the Nazi rule those many years ago.
If you're like most Israelis, you probably use a Waze app to help you drive pretty much anywhere. The Israeli-made application uses interactive GPS and user participation to create a living, breathing map of the road, but that doesn't mean you can take your eyes off of it. That's the lesson that one Waze user in the U.S. learned when he was following the app so blindly that he accidentally drove his car right into a lake. Now, don't worry, the driver and both passengers are completely safe. Their car, however, a Jeep Compass they'd borrowed from a friend, wound up at the bottom of a lake in Vermont. The driver was following his Waze so closely that he didn't notice the app had apparently pointed him onto a boat ramp. There was a frozen lake directly in front of them, but possibly because of the rain and foggy conditions in the area, nobody noticed. At least not until their car was on top of the ice. The car initially slid, then quickly cracked the top layer of ice, slipping right into the lake. Google, who purchased Waze from its original Israeli developer, couldn't explain exactly how the app had directed them into the lake, but maintains that drivers still need to keep alert when they're on the road, especially in bad weather. This story could have had a much worse ending, but thankfully everyone involved is safe and sound. Crazy. All right, this weekend marks International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Memorial events around the world will commemorate the horrific murder of nearly 6 million Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany during World War II. And one global initiative is asking people around the world to raise their hand and say, "We remember." Well, joining us now in the studio is Gabriel Rosenberg, the coordinator of the World Jewish Congress Jewish Diplomatic Corps, with a scoop on this very campaign. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so what is the We Remember movement? Tell us about it.
So the World Jewish Congress, which is the international organization representing over 100 Jewish communities all over the world, under the leadership of President Ronald Lauder, initiated the We Remember campaign as a way to commemorate the Holocaust globally. We're asking millions of people all over the world to do a simple yet meaningful task. And that is to take a photo of themselves holding a sign that says "We Remember" and upload it to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram using the hashtag We Remember, as a way to commemorate the Holocaust and remember the 6 million Jews that perished.
Very interesting. And I mean, how did you come up with this idea? Obviously, there's the power of social media now, but it is a unique idea.
Yeah, I mean, as there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors among us, it is up to us and the next generation to tell their stories and make sure that the world never forgets.
Absolutely. Now, what has the impact been so far? We're seeing a lot of people here, Holocaust survivors, members of the Israeli government, holding up these signs. Has this become international?
The response have been overwhelmingly positive. We have reached over 250 million people in the last few weeks in over 50 countries and over 24 languages.
Unbelievable.
We've had last year, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu joined, Israeli President Rivlin joined, and also the Prime Minister of Belgium. This year we've had over 60 members of Knesset, many Israeli ministers. Also, many sports teams have joined this year, including Maccabi Tel Aviv, Maccabi Haifa, and even Chelsea Football Club.
So I can imagine that this is going to be something that will continue to be an annual campaign, correct?
Exactly. This is the second time we do it, and it's going to keep going until the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And since yesterday until the Holocaust Remembrance Day, we are showing all these photos live at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, together with testimonials from Holocaust survivors.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Gabriel, and telling us about this. Everybody take part if you can. All right. We all know Israeli innovation is considered one of the best in the world. Well, the minds at Bloomberg clearly agree. The company has just ranked the 50 top innovative countries for their 2018 Innovation Index, and Israel has snagged a spot in the top 10. Repeating its stellar placing on last year's list, Bloomberg has kept Israel as the 10th most innovative country in the world, outperforming even the United States, which dropped a few slots this year down to number 11. While nations like South Korea, Sweden, Japan, and France all scored higher on the list than Israel, Israel actually made the #1 slot in several subcategories. Israeli R&D intensity has been named as the best in the world, and the country's research concentration is also numero uno, making Israel the only nation to top tech giant South Korea in R&D and Denmark in research concentration. This comes at the same time as the Israeli Prime Minister's attendance at the World Economic Forum, where Israel has just been named as the 16th most economically competitive country in the world, out of 137 nations. This is good news around the board for Israeli tech developers and businesses, so no doubt they have their eyes on that #1 slot next year.
All right, talking about sanitation, let's be real for a second here. No one likes cleaning the toilet bowl. Well, Israeli innovators might have finally just come up with a solution to the age-old despised chore with a robot that cleans the toilet no matter how bad or how dirty. Toybot is possibly the first of its kind in the world, a self-motorized machine that attaches to your toilet bowl and leaves the dirty work to the robots. The gadget was developed by 2 Israeli entrepreneurs in Haifa, apparently completely by accident. One day, one of the creators just came back from the bathroom and said what we've all said: how come there are so many amazing startup technologies out there, but here we are still in 2018 scrubbing toilets by hand? And voila, the Toybot was born. The battery-operated robot runs along a 360-degree track, meaning no mess is too big, too small, or too hidden to escape its reach. The Roomba of toilets, as it's called, will be ready for markets by next year, but the company is already getting thousands of pre-orders on their websites. The creators are hopeful that the unhygienic days of hand-cleaning toilets are behind us, and that pretty soon every toilet in every home, restaurant, office, and building will someday be cleaned totally by robot. That certainly sounds awesome, but our only question is, whose job is it to clean the toilet cleaning robot? All right, my friends, it's official. It's full-blown winter in Israel, which means it's time for Israelis across the country to panic. Bundle up for shockingly low 50 to 60-degree weather. It's a nightmare. It feels like spring in New York. And when the rain begins, don't get me started. It's basically time for a government shutdown. Well, here's a look at the top 5 crises that send Israelis into shock over winter happening to their country yet again. At #1, rain, go away. 4 years of drought have strained Israel, yet when the rain comes, the country has a breakdown. Here are some examples of Israel's modern-day 2018 infrastructure going to waste because of a couple of inches of water. At #2, forget rain, let's talk about storms. Once in a while, Israel braces for a winter storm. This is what an Israeli storm looks like, side by side with an equally devastating storm in the States. And this is how Israelis react naturally. All right, up next at #3 is snow. Yes, snow actually falls on the occasion in Israel, not in Tel Aviv, of course, but in Jerusalem and the Hermon. Here's the thing, though. While most countries celebrate snow with a day off from work or school, in Israel they stock up on food for a month, lock themselves in their homes, and close off the roads. I mean, how can people function with a light layer of the fuzzy stuff? It's basically the apocalypse. It doesn't happen too often, but a few years ago, Jerusalem was actually buried in the white stuff, and it took almost a month for some of it to melt. At #4, impending tsunamis. When tsunami warning signs started popping up all over Tel Aviv, it seemed like a joke. Well, it's time to take a good hard look at the fine print on those signs. If the shallow waters of the Mediterranean happen to make it past the boardwalk, then just run to Kikar Rabin. Apparently, that's where you'll be safe. Of course, once Israelis saw these signs, there was an outburst of panic. But here's the good news. A tsunami happens about once every century in the Mediterranean, so stay calm, my friends. All right, and finally at #5, you better be worried because every once in a while there's that random warm winter day in Israel. You know, a toasty 80 degrees where all of the Israelis run to the beaches as if they will never have the chance to see the sun again. It's no fun being stuck in a heavy jacket when it gets hot, and all of that overheating is another cause for panic because it's proof global warming is happening. But it's okay because Israelis are willing to deal with pretty much anything to get their tan on. All right, guys, that's it for the top 5 reasons to panic this winter in Israel. Stay safe, people. All right, and now for our Hebrew word of the day. With the rainy season comes the inevitable mud that you'll accidentally track into your house. So today's Hebrew word is melukhlach, which means dirty. Yeah, things can get all kinds of muddy and melukhlach in the winter. When both your shoes are melukhlachot, it pretty much means you're going to get your whole floor meluklechet, or dirty in the feminine conjugation. That's the worst, because in the winter, all you want to do is throw your stuff down, turn on the heater, and warm up in bed, which is just one reason we don't do spring cleaning in winter. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be stormy and cold, with a drop in temperatures to a low of about 47 or 8 degrees Celsius. Temperatures are expected to drop further over the weekend, with more chances of rain and a high of roughly 60 or 16 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.4 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and thanks for watching.